For March, the Leadership Book Club, we covered Primal Leadership, which is ultimately about emotional intelligence. And there's going to be another video discussing the actual book, but I want to talk about emotional intelligence in leadership specifically. So there are four types. There are four pillars to emotional intelligence. There's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And the research that was done around emotional intelligence to date has talked about how a leader needs an element from each column, but doesn't need to hold all of the components of emotional intelligence. But that if a leader can hold a component of each pillar, they're more likely to be effective in the work that they're doing, in influencing people, in supporting people, in managing themselves. So if we think about emotional intelligence as those four pillars, I'm going to talk about each pillar. So self-awareness. So this is my ability to understand what emotional experience I'm having, what is happening for me in my internal world. And often in leadership, when we're trying to move through something that's difficult, it can be really challenging to identify our emotional state objectively, because what we tend to do is go to justifying it or judging ourselves or judging other people. It's very difficult sometimes for us to acknowledge what is happening emotionally for us. The second part is self-management. And I think this is probably something that is more visibly available to the people around us. So there's four parts to that. So there is emotional self-control. So can I feel emotions and manage myself with the feelings, or does the emotion take over? Adaptability. Can I adapt and be flexible with the reality of the situation and what's in front of me? Achievement orientated. Can I focus on what I'm trying to achieve, or do I become distracted by all of the entanglements, challenges, emotional struggles? Positive outlook. Can I approach things with the attitude that it is achievable, that I can do it, that we can find a way? And self-management is those four pieces together. And it's important as leaders we at least do one of them in order to be able to be influential and effective in our work. But it's also important for us to think about what parts of this aren't we doing? What isn't coming to us naturally? The third part is social awareness, and I think this can be challenging in organisations because it requires two things: empathy and organisational awareness. So organisational awareness is understanding the rules of the organisation, the written rules, the unsaid rules, but the rules that we live by and work by. And that can be challenging because often people, when we are aware of the rules of the organisation, we move into judging it rather than acknowledging it and accepting it as true. True not as in right, but true as in this is the reality of this organisation at this point. And therefore, if I want to make effective decisions, I can't work with what I think it should be. I have to work with the reality of what it is. And the other part is empathy. And I always have a critical view on empathy, meaning that empathy is ultimately says I need to access some emotional experience within me to understand the emotional experience within you. And I would move more towards compassion, because the research tells us that compassion, there isn't a thing called compassion fatigue, it's actually empathy fatigue, but they've used the word compassion on it, but it's not actually compassion, it's empathy that creates the fatigue. Compassion is more supportive of inclusive behaviours, because compassion allows somebody to say, I don't need to know what you're going through or have to understand it or have to have that experience. I appreciate that I'm walking with you while you have that experience, and I acknowledge that while you say you have that experience, it is valid. I do not need to bring it into my lens and my world to understand. I don't know if emotional intelligence measures have considered the complexity between empathy and compassion, but I think it's important. I'm going to focus on compassion, even though that's not what is measured in emotional intelligence, but I'm going to focus on compassion because compassion results in the same things empathy does, but with less burnout and more effectively because it engages with people that you may not share experiences with. So compassion results in the same things empathy does, and it also doesn't cost you as much as a leader or a person, emotionally speaking, and it allows you to incorporate views outside your perspective. So I'm going to talk about compassion when I talk about emotional intelligence. I'm saying inclusive leadership, emotional intelligence, because compassion allows you to be an inclusive leader, to be more effective. It also can balance out some of the groupthink that happens when we use empathy and the like me bias, where we pick people that are similar to us. So I'm going to talk about compassion, even though the evidence talks about empathy, because I know that compassion is more effective in leadership than empathy is. Then there's relationship management, and this is really challenging. So I'm going to read the list, okay? So we've got your ability to influence, coach and mentor, conflict management, teamwork, and engage in inspirational leadership. So this relationship management is all about how you foster relationships with other people and what impact they have. And this is important. Sometimes when I work with leaders, they intend to be inspirational, to support conflict management, to be influential, to coach and mentor, to do teamwork. But actually, they use that language and the impact isn't that. The impact that they're having is they're directive, they're authoritarian, they tell people what to do, not coach or mentor. They think they're influencing by demanding and attempting to control. They think they're supporting teamwork when they might actually be setting the team up against each other. So what we have to think about when we're thinking about relationship management in terms of emotional intelligence is not what our intention is, but what is the impact. When we look at the impact of our actions on the people around us, that's how we get a sense of whether we're actually managing relationship management effectively, or we're using the language of emotional intelligence, like everyone's using collaboration and very few people know what it is. We're using the language, but we aren't actually practicing the thing, and how we know that is the impact it has. And so if you want to check how your emotional intelligence is right now, a couple of things you can ask yourself. Do I have a connection to my emotional experiences, or do some emotions catch me or lose me, or do I find it struggle to put words on them? If I do, then the focus should be on getting into relationship with your emotions. Self-management. Can I experience a feeling and manage myself in the setting? Can I adapt to the reality in front of me? Do I stay focused on what is achievable and what I'm trying to achieve? And do I bring a positive outlook, or do I use fear to make decisions and influence me and other people? Do I use compassion in my leadership? In official emotional intelligence surveys, it's empathy, but do I use compassion because compassion is more effective and costs us less as people? And do I have organisational awareness, or do I spend my time fighting with the reality of the organisation so I don't actually adapt as required to what I need to do, or make decisions? If I'm not happy with the culture of the organisation, I can leave. But what doesn't work for any of us is thinking that the organisation should be a certain way and then responding to it as if it is that way when it isn't. So organisational awareness is about accepting the reality of the organisation as it is, so that you can then make a good decision about what you're going to do next. It doesn't mean accepting as in you then accept it and make no choices. Accepting it is simply acknowledging reality and then making a choice after that you take responsibility for. And then relationship management. Do I influence by attempting to control people? Or do I influence it by giving them information that is influential in a way that they can receive it and understand it? Do I coach and mentor? Do I ask questions? Do I listen first? Or do I start with what I know and what I think should work? Conflict management. What do I think that means really? And how do I keep intervening in conflict? Do I support people to move through conflict? Do I hold grudges? Do I avoid conflict? Like, what's my relationship with conflict? That will tell you about that part. Teamwork. What is my experience with working with peers? How do I manage power? How do I feel in relationship to peers and others? How do I feel when I'm not the smartest in the room or the one in control? How do I feel that I have an equal place in the team? And how do I manage that group dynamic that comes up for everybody in different ways in teams? And inspirational leadership. So do I think about how I am inspiring best practice, the right choices, using the right values for the organisation, working off principles? Or do I see leadership as something that's closer to management and directing? Do people feel hopeful when they engage with me and inspired? Or do they feel like they've got more tasks to do? Or are they full of fear or anxiety or being micromanaged? So these are the kind of things we can think about when we're trying to assess our emotional intelligence. What I will say is that the most effective leaders, the research is telling us, are emotionally intelligent. Not necessarily technically intelligent. For some professions and industries, technical expertise is important. For others, it's less important. Some people say you cannot manage technical people without technical skills. Others say you can. I say it depends on the setting and the context and how you're attempting to influence people and how power is shared. If you're in a setting where we only give technical people power, then yeah, your technical skills will help you in influencing people. That's the part where organisational intelligence is important, because by understanding it, you're able to make decisions. In other settings, emotional intelligence is given power. If you can manage working with people and moving people and supporting people, then that's what's given power. So while emotional intelligence is absolutely central to most successful and effective leadership, there are other elements that come into it that it covers, like organisational awareness means understanding whether technical expertise are given power or not. But what I do know from, I just realised recently, 12 years in practice, is that it doesn't matter how technically intelligent you are or informed. If you aren't using your emotional intelligence, you won't be able to bridge your expertise, knowledge, and technical skill set to people. You won't be able to translate that and influence people with it, because you'll be busy being technical while others may not be able to relate to that. So it's just important to keep that in mind. Emotional intelligence is often the bridge even for technical expertise when it comes to leadership. If you have any questions, check out below, and there'll also be some links for further reading and videos for you to consider in relation to emotional intelligence and effective leadership. My name is Sile Walsh. I'm a leadership specialist. Thank you for joining me.